The issues that captured my attention and all of my commitment were outlined in Closing the Gap 2015 document and the Honor and Promises 2018 document. It was my vision to collaborate with all the rights holders, achieve consensus, and facilitate resolution. For more than 40 years, I have been humbled to learn from many chiefs and elders who instilled in me a strong belief in our First Nations traditions and laws, and a commitment that they be passed on to our young people. I have always believed that we will prevail by coming together in cooperation, in partnership, in unity, and ceremony. And from there, developing processes that unite rather than divide. I have given you my experience, my energy, my strength, and my commitment to improving the lives of our people. Unwavering is my belief that the time has come for us to share in the wealth and riches of our own country, Canada, to provide our people with hope and a vision, and to see our inherent Aboriginal and treaty rights respected and implemented. To have served you and the people you represent as we continue to strengthen our nations together and regain our rightful place here in Canada and in the global community is and shall remain my greatest honor. Thank you all so much.
Un grand merci au chef national Bellegarde pour votre allocution d'ouverture et vos bons mots. Maintenant, chef et mandataire, pour la présentation spéciale en hommage au chef national Bellegarde, j'invite le gardien Mitchell à s'adresser à vous. Elder Mike Mitchell, the floor is yours.
Before we start, Agwego what's going to wara. Ejini just what I'm sadaki. One yaga ho. Oya sa humaya dara ako. Ongi wanona sa amaduga. Tokora ni wanaga agone. Today, I've been asked to come here from Akasasta and speak to the words of our ancestors, of many of our nations. First, to congratulate the National Chief for the outstanding work he has done for all of us in the past 6-7 years. And before we start, we have people waiting who are going to sing honor song that is part of our opening. So we'll listen to them first.
Yeah.
I've been asked to speak to the National Chief and reflect on his time with the Assembly First Nations. I speak on behalf of the leaders across the country. I speak on behalf of the chiefs, executive vice chiefs that work with them. And I also speak on behalf of the staff of the National Office of the Assembly First Nations in Ottawa. I came on board at the same time in 2014-15. Shortly after Harper had left and a new regime came in on both sides. Many chiefs will remember there wasn't a whole lot of monies available. And that's where we started. A lot of determination. And I observed there it is, because he relied a lot on his culture, ceremony, and his language. They got us through a lot of meetings because it strengthened our spirit. And because of that, we made language a priority. We called the first meeting National Chiefs Committee on Languages. There was no money. There was no organization at the time, but we kept it up. And pretty soon, we started having meetings, and people in government came forward. A lot of deliberations, and then they saw that we were very serious of funding money to protect our Indigenous languages in our communities. So we did the consultation along with them. We made sure that we're on top. I say this particular part because I was in with them and I saw with my own eyes the determination, the level of importance that National Chief Bellegarde put on our language. And also on the inside, I saw the many different types of ceremonies, of talkings that gave us the strength to carry out the determination to continue, find a way to get things done. Well, we had that joyous moment when they gave royal assent and it became a law to protect our Indigenous languages going into the future, to provide enough funds to re-educate and relearn our languages across the country in our communities. It may be a small thing to some, but I observed what was a very big thing for many of our people, followed by child welfare, leading a team, starting with the executive vice chiefs and the staff. That's just a small sample of being a team leader, a small sample of determination that things can get better, even when it looks like we don't have a chance to succeed. In working with the National Chief as resident elder, I saw some good things from the staff to the vice chiefs to the chiefs of this country, finding a way to work together, which is the only way that we're going to succeed. It was led by Mayor Bellegarde. Today, we want to honor Barry for the outstanding work that he's done for First Nation leaders across the country. And with that, on behalf of the executive, the staff of Assembly of First Nation, many chiefs, we want to present you with an eagle feather that will help carry on your journey because it doesn't stop here. This journey continues on. Thank you for outstanding work for Indigenous people of this country. Yamako.
Just maybe as we call for the video presentation, just to say a very big a big thank you to all the chiefs, leaders, and staff here, and friends and relatives. It's a big honor to have been gifted with an eagle feather. And together, everybody achieves more. Keep united, stay strong. Focus on your language ceremonies. We've always said our own languages, our own lands, our own laws, our own people, our own identifiable forms of government. The most important right we have is that right to self-determination. So we'll work together. We'll move beyond the residential school genocide. We'll move beyond that Indian Act, that colonization, and reconstitute ourselves as First Nations people, as nations. And it won't be just the federal government, provincial government. People will recognize there's also another jurisdiction and sovereignty here in Canada, and that's First Nations government. So let's keep our circles strong, making sure our ceremonies guide us each and every day based on truth and honesty, love, respect, courage, wisdom, humility. And
now we have a short presentation, a video presentation we want to share with you.
Thank you for this. We will now get back to Elder Chief Mitchell. Sorry, Mike Mitchell.
All right.
Which is an honor and a privilege, no matter how difficult it can be or seem on certain days. And so I do want to acknowledge that and his contributions and his successes and his tangible achievements during his terms as National Chief, but also his career. And so thank you very much, Perry. Heartfelt thanks to you and to your family. So with that, Chiefs, we do need to turn our attention back to the continued work that the National Chief's Office oversees. And we do want to look to the adoption of the rules. The rules and the procedures. So the rules are in the conference kit that has been available to you, that has been updated. It contains the charter, it contains the general rules and procedures, the resolution procedures, and the election procedures itself that has been updated based upon the resolutions passed to amend the charter on what the charter committee has called the easy parts of the moving up through the charter amendments that we will deal over the next little while. I also want to note that at the December AGA, a set of an online voting framework, a short 3-page document was provided, which enabled and provided for the security of having online meetings and voting. Here in particular, we're talking about the voting for resolutions and motions within the Assembly. The charter itself, the election rules for the National Chief, plus the supplement provided by the Chief Electoral Officer are separate rules, which will be, of course, brought into bear when we arrive at that based upon our decisions that we will make today. So I do understand that there was a little bit of some difficulty on the website. I had a few difficulties logging in as well to access the materials that you all see. The online voting framework is there. The link was not quite set up as smoothly as we would like. And I just wanted to say in that brief but thorough 3-page document, it does, as I said, provide provisions for the safety and security and the use of online voting within an online virtual assembly, as a provision which allowed for that to be used in future assemblies, and that has been used for the design of this assembly as well. And I would say the one change we needed to note is that in our original rules, it did say that we had an interesting way of deciding our quorum for the meeting, which in fact we'll try to clarify with our charter resolutions a little bit later today. But in terms of this online voting, the quorum is set by the vote itself. And so we will then proceed to that. So I just wanted to acknowledge sort of that framework for that and where that is all available for you. What I would look for is I will ask the Resolutions Committee to put on the screen the motion to adopt the rules, and we'll do them in 2 motions, rules and then the agenda. So if I could have the motion to adopt the rules on the screen, and I will look for a mover and seconder for that. I have a clarification question. So there is a in our rules, it says one person may carry a proxy. A chief being a person has their vote. They also have the proxy vote. And so the question is, how will that get recognized in the voting process? And so I will look to the technicians to help us with that. I don't like to speculate too quickly, but I assume then it becomes a follow-up to double check with those those chiefs who may be carrying proxies. So we'll just make sure that that gets properly recorded, and I will look for some guidance on that. As requested, I am looking for the motion to adopt the rules and procedures, and I do believe we have a separate motion slide for that. Oh, I'm incorrect. I just see the note there. So with that, the technicians don't have a slide. With that, then I will look to a raised hands feature. I'll look for a mover to the rules and procedure for the assembly. Can I have a mover and a seconder through a show of hands, raising of hands in the feature? I see Ogama Jason Henry and proxy Judith Sayers have moved and seconded. And so I thank you very much for that. I also do thank Chief Marshal Happy Jack for also offering to do that. With that, is there any need for discussion of the rules of procedure for the online assembly? I'll look for raised hands on that. Once again, is there need for discussion of the online rules of procedure for the online assembly? Seeing none, third and final call. Is there any need for discussion of the motion to adopt the rules of procedure for the online virtual assembly? Seeing none, then let us move to the vote. I'll double check, do we have a voting poll for that resolution, or that motion, excuse me? Let me just check with the technicians. So no slide for the motion. We do have the voting poll, and so once again, let us launch the poll for the vote. And it's very important that each of you cast your vote, each of you here in the Chiefs and Proxies room. And we will follow up, like as noted, with those who are on the phone. And then we'll also get the registration to do the check with those chiefs who may also be carrying a proxy. I do want to encourage the remainder of the Chiefs and Proxies who are here in the Chiefs and Proxies room to please cast a vote. As Cedric had mentioned earlier, if by chance you didn't cast your vote and the poll was not on your screen, you would just click on the poll button at the bottom and it will reopen for you as long as it has not been closed by the technicians. I do want to also note to the delegates that we've done what we can to correct the number. So there's lots of staff, co-chairs, technicians in the room, and we try to correct that number as carefully as we can. All right, I would just like to push a little bit more for a few more votes from those chiefs and proxies that are there, as we also are reaching out to check with those who may be on phone. And I'll just check for clarification whether we have any of those numbers, if I have a number for that, just in terms of how many are there. And so as Cedric had mentioned, we will see the preliminary result, and generally in this case, of course, it'll be fairly clear. We will also just wait. We will need to then be reporting back later on the official result as all of those tabulations, make the slight adjustments in the numbers. I see 101 of 131 voting. All right, final few seconds, and then we will close the poll. Again, all in favor. So it is all in favor. And so, but really, I was just pushing to just make sure that people were casting their votes this way. And again, a reminder: this is a different vote in the system that and then will be used for the election. So we'll clarify that later. All right, thank you, very much, ladies and gentlemen. Let us close the poll. We've arrived at 4 minutes, and so thank you very much. And so I appreciate that. Again, unanimous consensus on the adoption of the rules. We do need to turn our attention to the agenda, and that has, of course, been made available. And I will walk through it really quickly. It is, again, on the website for you. I'll just give you a quick walkthrough in terms of that, what we've got listed there. In terms of our work here, our first, following the adoption of the agenda with the concurrence, the recommendation of the Resolutions Committee and the co-chairs and the concurrence of the Executive Committee, we will turn to the draft Resolution 3, which was about the delay of the election for the National Chief, just to anchor that into, as it affects our time management issues subsequent to that. Following that, you'll see on your agenda that we do have some business to be dealt with. We've got the audits for the NIB and the NIB Trust and the one other corporate group of ours. We'll have video presentations on that. The presenters will be present. We will then turn our attention to the residential school and, of course, hear from Kamloops and from Kawasis First Nation. And there are 2 emergency resolutions related specifically to that situation, which have been approved by the executive and which we will deal with at that point. We then turn our attention to charter resolutions. There are 2 charter resolutions being brought forward by the Charter Renewal Committee. And so they're agreed to anchor it there on the agenda. That is one in terms of our designated representatives and proxies. So the quorum issue, clarifying that language. And the second one on PEI as a region. Following that on the agenda and pending the results of draft Resolution 3, we then introduce and turn the Assembly over to the Chief Electoral Officer, who then is in charge of the electoral process and will lead us all through that until it is finished and we have a new National Chief, at which time, depending on time available, we would then return to the agenda work that is there. I do need to note on day 2 of our agenda, while it is all election, again, pending the result of the draft resolution, that 12 o'clock tomorrow is the deadline for the late resolutions, and 2 o'clock tomorrow is the deadline for registering for the election for the National Chief. Following the completion of that, again, depending on the results of that vote we'll have shortly, we will then pick up with the agenda, and you'll see we have quite a bit of work to do. The new National Chief will help us start that work. We will look to the Quad Council, the 4 councils, which are now in our organization. We will have an update on previous resolutions. We will look to the COVID task force and take some time to honor those who've been doing that important frontline work for us, as well as to take a moment to sort of reflect on those that we have lost and those who have been touched by the COVID virus as well. We do have the opportunity for regional chief updates, which are taped. And then we will turn to the remaining resolutions at that time. And as you'll see in the package, there are 24 at the moment. And then that also is just pending whatever happens with late resolutions between now and noon. And then following that, we are designated to close on Thursday at 4:30 p.m. Begin our closing 4:30 p.m. At that time with the National Chief's closing and the protocol closings and the retiring of the flag. So that is your agenda before you. I do need a motion to adopt the agenda. May I have a mover and seconder, please? And then once again, I will ask for a show of hands. A raising of hands in the chat. Thank you, Joe Pierre, and thank you, Terry Richardson. So moved by Chief Joe Pierre and seconded by Chief Terry Richardson. I do want to thank Chief Collins and Sagamai Denny for also offering. But again, moved by Chief Pierre and seconded as noted. With that, is there need for discussion of the motion to adopt the resolution? Sagamai Denny, I do see that your hand is still up, so I do want to check to see if that is a need for discussion. Thank you for lowering that. Second call, is there a need for discussion of the motion to adopt the agenda? Third and final call, is there a need for discussion to adopt the motion or the resolution? If not, I'll ask that the poll on that motion be started. Once again, encourage everyone to please cast your vote. Okay. Thank you very much. I see 105 votes. I do want to encourage a few more votes if I could. I just will clarify. So as we had noted, there are a number of technicians, there are co-chairs, there are staff support, there's Encore who's managing the platform. And so those numbers show up. So I'm told that we have in and around 112 chiefs and proxies currently present and voting. All right, so 107. So again, the majority and everyone unanimous consensus. I see one abstention on the motion to adopt the agenda. I will just ask, generally, often we will ask to see if that abstention wishes to have their name noted on the motion. And so I will ask for that as well. So I'll just check if the person with the abstention wishes to send me a private message, we can make sure that that is recorded in the official record and there. And again, as a reminder to the chiefs and proxies, on the AFN website, there is a conference page and an election page, and we are looking at the agenda that is there for the conference page. And I do see that it has been posted as a PDF in the chat here in the chiefs and proxies room for everyone that is there. I see a question about quorum, and so just as we're good here, so we'll let us close this vote on the adoption of the agenda, noting that it is carried by unanimous or consent of the remainder with one abstention. So just noting that, thank you very much. In terms of quorum in the online voting framework, what it does provide is that the votes, the test votes and the votes do set the quorum number. And so for today, our quorum number was set at 57, will be the number that sets our quorum. So just as a clarification for that. With that, thank you very much, Chiefs. We have now adopted the rules and the procedures and the agenda. And so let us now turn to our next agenda item, and we will turn to draft resolution 3, delaying the election for the national chief. So just by way of procedure, I do want to make sure that our mover and seconder are here. And let me just pull that up on my screen. I do want, and that's why I'm careful to look at the right document. Councilum, Dustin Rivers from Squamish First Nation is our mover, and Chief Dana Tiza Tram from Wet'suwet'en First Nation is our seconder. Councilum and Chief Tiza Tram, are you present? I do see that Chief Tiza Tram is in the participants list, and I do see Councilum is in the participants list as well. So again, by the online voting framework, they are deemed to be present as they are present in our participants list in the Zoom. And so with that, this is to note the resolution there. Again, it's in the resolutions package for all of you. It was an on-time resolution, properly reviewed and put forward by the resolutions committee, and being consistent with our charter. They identified a number of letters that come forward identifying some legitimate concerns with the idea of having an election during the pandemic. They note that we have been proceeding since the December Assembly with the election process. You know, again, but then they emphasize a number of them, you know, the height of the pandemic at this point, not allowing us to meet verbally. The charter does not provide for online elections. The you know, the fairness issues that are there that they feel have not been addressed well or adequately, that the chiefs do have the power to postpone the assembly if they so choose, and that the charter provides a provision for who would step in as the national chief in terms of the executive as a whole fulfilling that role and making a determination. And so therefore, be it resolved that the chiefs in assembly, one, direct the Assembly of First Nations Secretariat and Chief Electoral Officer to immediately postpone the election of the national chief that is scheduled to take place on July 7, 2021. Two, direct the AFN Executive Committee in consultation with First Nations to determine a date and location for an assembly to be held for the purpose of electing the national chief, provided that date will not be later than December 31, 2022, the postponed election assembly. Three, direct the AFN Executive Committee to determine no later than 60 days prior to the postponed election assembly, and having regard to public health orders and guidance, whether or not the chiefs in assembly can safely gather in person at the postponed election assembly. And four, if and only if the AFN Executive Committee determines that it is not safe for the chiefs in assembly to gather in person at the postponed election assembly, the Chief Electoral Officer, with the support of the AFN Secretariat and with input from the AFN Executive Committee, is authorized and directed to A, conduct the national chief election by way of online voting, and B, develop a comprehensive set of rules and procedures that will govern the conduct of an online national chief election, and to provide a copy of such rules and procedures in the formal notice of the postponed election assembly. I look to the movers and second, and I see that Seconder Danny Tiza Tram does have his hand up, but I'll check with the mover first, if I could. Otherwise, we will then look to Chief Dana Tiza Tram. Councilman? I'll ask you to unmute your mic. Thank you, sir. Nope, still muted.
There we go. Thank you. Yeah, I'm in support of the resolution, but I do want to call a point of order and ask that the entirety of the resolution, including the preamble, be read as well for the delegates.
All right, I shall do that for you. Chief Tram, did you wish to speak first, or shall I read the whereases? All right, delaying the election of the national chief, AFN, it's the subject is AFN governance, moved by Councilum, seconded by Chief Dana Tiza Tram. The whereases. A, legitimate concerns have been expressed by chiefs and leaders about the fairness of proceeding with an online election whilst a public health emergency continues and chiefs and leaders cannot gather in person. For example, on April 23rd, 2021, BC Assembly of First Nations wrote a letter to the AFN Executive Committee expressing concerns related to the national chief election. 2, on May 3, 2021, the Assembly of First Nations Yukon Region, representing 14 Yukon First Nations, wrote to the AFN Executive Committee and AFN Secretariat calling for the national chief's election to be postponed. 3, on May 4, 2021, Tsleil-Waututh First Nation wrote to the AFN Secretary calling for the national chief election to be postponed. 4, on May 7, 2021, BC Assembly of First Nations wrote to the AFN Executive Committee calling on the national chief's election to be postponed. On May 7, 2021, Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafond wrote to the AFN Secretariat calling for the national chief election to be postponed. And 6, on May 14, 2021, Squamish Nation wrote to the AFN Secretariat calling for the national chief's election to be postponed. B, the First Nations and Assembly passed a motion on December 8, 2020 at the December 2020 Special Chiefs Assembly to appoint a chief electoral officer, the December 2020 motion. 1, that the First Nations in Assembly appoint Ron Lawfer as the chief electoral officer for the national chief election to be held in Toronto, Ontario in July 2021 and virtually. The December 2020 motion called for a virtual meeting in which voting in the national chief election would take place online and the chief electoral officer review options for polling stations to be set up in each region. D, the December 2020 motion could not forecast that the country would be experiencing a third wave in the COVID-19 pandemic, nor did it contemplate the number of limitations, including issues with accessibility and connectivity, particularly for remote northern communities, and barriers for participation of women that a virtual election could only entrench. E, the AFN Charter does not provide for online elections. F, to date, the concerns regarding the fairness of proceeding with an election that is held entirely online and the risk of the election results being challenged have not been adequately addressed by the AFN Secretariat. G, it is within the power of the Chiefs and Assembly under the AFN Charter to postpone the National Chiefs election to an assembly to be held at a future date. And H, if the National Chiefs election is postponed, Article 22.3 of the AFN Charter provides that, quote, the, quote, rest of the Executive Committee shall assume the National Chief's role and function until such time as other arrangements are made by the First Nations in Assembly. And I have read the therefore be it resolves into the record. And with that, I return to the mover and seconder for comment. Councillor? And I'll ask you to unmute.
My apologies, Harold. I have to wait for the staff to unmute me. So, dear delegates, my name is Paul Salem. I'm an elected councillor and spokesperson for the Squamish Nation, here representing my council and my people, and also representing First Nations, I think, from BC, for example, who passed our own resolution in BC at the BC AFN on this issue. My own council approved by resolution a letter to the AFN on this issue. And also more recently in the last few days, joining the calls of First Nations leaders in BC who are dealing with evacuations as a result of wildfires, significant crises that are happening throughout BC due to the wildfires that is making it unable for First Nations to participate today and tomorrow and the next day. But I guess I'll just take a moment to share with everybody. We are in an unprecedented time. This pandemic is something that we have never seen before as First Nations people. We also know that the role of the National Chief, both as the lead for the AFN executive, as well as a representative for the AFN in its dealings with the federal government through the resolutions that are passed by the Chiefs in Assembly, is an integral role to that relationship between First Nations and the federal government. We anticipate that there will be an election federally coming soon, but here we are today with a very small portion of the AFN delegates that should be here and that could be here. We're all aware of the challenges that it takes for First Nations people living in remote areas without access to high-speed internet, to the various crises that are happening, like for example in BC, that holding this election right now without a broad level of participation from First Nations across this country is detrimental to the success of both the AFN and to the success of the many issues that the delegates of the AFN work together to achieve, to benefit all of our nations. I strongly urge the delegates here today to think about who's not in the room today and why aren't they here? How can we show up with care in our hearts and integrity in our process to listen to the calls to postpone this election so that we can have a meaningful election like we have in the past, that we have meaningful participation from First Nations across the country. I think many of us who have been through many elections know that AFN election assemblies attract some of the largest participation out of any assemblies of the AFN for elections. But here we are today with a very, very low turnout. And I don't fault our brothers and sisters and our relatives from the various First Nations who can't be here today. It is a very difficult time, very challenging time. But I strongly hope and urge our delegates to think about postponing the election. We have had times in the past where there was no national chief and the AFN executive was able to step in for the remainder of that term to ensure that there was consistency in the work that needed to happen at that level. So we have the tools available to us to do this, but I strongly urge that we think about how we can postpone this election so that we can have a meaningful participation of our leaders across the country. And we know that with the case counts that are dropping in many provinces, with the distribution of vaccines to our communities and the large take-up of vaccines in our communities, the changes in interprovincial travel, that things are changing and that we are heading towards the end of this pandemic. And we can, I think, and I believe, head to a place where we can have a gathering together in the fall, late fall or early winter, so that we can celebrate as First Nations leaders a new national chief that is going to work with all the regions to advance the best interests of our leadership and our communities in these very difficult times. I'll leave it there. I really hope that my words conveyed the utmost respect that I have for our First Nations leaders, that those that are here today that could make it. My heart, my prayers go out to all the leaders out there who are challenged during this pandemic times. But I really hope that we as leadership can stand up and say, we want to have a process that we can be proud of and that we can celebrate looking back years down the road. And I say in my language, those are my words to share with you all today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Chief Diana Tejas-Tram, would you wish to address the Assembly as well? I did see your hand earlier. Welcome, Chief Tram. Just give you a moment to get the mic unmuted. There you go.
Juntlang Gwinzi Shalakat Bajri Chitnali Tisha Tram Bajri. Good day, all respected leaders. I respect and am thankful for the opportunity to address everyone for this vital issue. I come to you today while wildfire smoke hangs in the air of my community thick, while we have our first case of COVID in our community, 80 miles north of the Arctic Circle, 60 miles east of the Alaska border, in a rural community where there is no road access, in a community where I cannot be on a phone call longer than 20 minutes without it dropping, with unstable and continuously worsening internet connection. I come to you today tired, concerned, but also appreciative of this opportunity to address this issue out of my respect for the institution of the Assembly of First Nations, for all of the chiefs that are here today that are the true heart of this country. We have struggling communities across Canada for all the reasons that were mentioned before by my brother from BC. We have not been able to meet or prepare for this assembly. We've heard from the federal government that the Canadian and the federal plan for rollouts of vaccinations, that they are hoping, if all goes according to plan, that they will be able to drop border restrictions and advisories across the country by the end of September. We are certainly in unprecedented times in what is called a once-in-a-century event. But all of this environment surrounds and leaves us with the residual actions that result in the election process going forward here today. And again, this is out of respect for the integrity of elections. And I certainly know about this subject in my own community and in the Yukon. We've seen these letters and these voices being raised from the Yukon and from British Columbia. And in this time of crisis, we must be supported in our hearts, minds, and voices by our traditional values and our customs. But in today's modern era, we have a duty to preserve the integrity of the election process. We've heard through the resolution today that the charter and the election rules are silent on a number of key and integral issues, that the chiefs in the assembly should be the body to approve the election rules. We know that there is no dispute resolution process. We require the fairness, transparency, and flexibility in the face of holding an election during the pandemic. It is quite different to navigate all of the issues, the unprecedented issues that this generation has faced that brings us all here today. And again, I think about every one of us and what we've had to navigate to be here today, and especially those chiefs who are not. I almost was unable to make today's meeting. This is also a reflection of the unprecedented times. And as a national entity that is on par with the Prime Minister, the federal elections, we too have to have the internal vetting and processes that allow for us to stand as the proud nations and organization that we are, that our people expect of us. This is so key because we should not expose ourselves to the opportunity for challenges to an election. If this were to go through, are there gaps in which such a challenge could be bearing and hold weight? These are the types of questions and considerations we have to make. I understand that in these times, our patience wears thin, but especially with large movements as large organizations on behalf of hundreds of representatives, thousands of people, and millions of lives, that we do have to take that time to ensure a bulletproof approach as we stand to these larger issues. I know that this is certainly of inconvenience, but when we look at the emergencies that continue to grow, the priorities of our communities as we navigate wildfires, floods, pandemics, this is truly something of consideration, and our elections should also reflect the same. I certainly support this resolution, And I thank everyone for your time. Masicho.
Thank you, Chief Dana Tram. I see that Cookby Christian has raised his hand. Over to you, Cookby. Just give you a moment to unmute that, get that mic unmuted. There you go.
Thanks, Harold. My Indian name is Big Voices Speaks the Truth. I'm the chief of the people of Splatsina, the Soqupim Nation. I want to thank this morning the knowledge keepers for the prayers and the songs and the blessings that we had and the singers, because when we do that, we open up that space for our ancestors. So I really do appreciate that. I'm speaking in favor of this resolution. We have to think about it in this way: Kukukbi chiefs, Kumipala, council members and proxies. The AFN is not an organization. The most significant piece of the AFN is the chiefs in assembly. That's us right here, right now. We make the decisions about what happens. It's not left up to the executive, to the national chief or the AFN staff. It is up to us to make these decisions. This year has been unprecedented. It's the year of a trail of tears and trauma for our people. First, the pandemic, and then the children, 215 plus, 751. And now in our part of the world, wildfires where villages have been wiped out. Our people are hurting. The tremendous amount, especially for the Kukukbi, the chiefs, the amount of pressure that is on the chiefs right now and what they're having to manage in terms of the personal type of issues around the trauma of the children, and then all of a sudden losing homes and family members. So we have to think about it in that context. The AFN and the National Chief's Office is important, but we need to do this right and do it in person. I really think we need to really postpone this, and the pandemic is not quite over. And our nation is looking at a state of emergency around wildfires. A lot of the chiefs couldn't be on here because they're out fighting fire. They're protecting their people and protecting their homes. And then we're still dealing with the aftermath of the children. A lot of our people are in post-traumatic stress. We're having to find resources for our people. And the chiefs are in a process of grieving and loss. So let's think about that for a minute. The whole nation is grieving from coast to coast to coast. I think it's inappropriate at this time to hold this type of process. And I think we need to put it aside and come back together in person and then do the election. So I'm fully in support of this resolution. Now let's do what's right for the future, because at this time in our history, what we do next is critical to where we go. And so I want to say to all of you Kukukbi chiefs, think about that. It is up to us. It is, we are the ones we've been waiting for. We make the decision. It's up to us, and we have that responsibility. So I wanted to thank each and every one of you, and just keep that in mind as we move forward in this process, because it has not been an easy time for a lot of people. A lot of people still are suffering from the post-traumatic stress of the children, and there's still lots of things going on that people don't see on the outside, but it's going on the inside. So I want to honor each and every one of you, the work that you do for your people, especially for your children. And thank you to think about this, and let's postpone and do it in real time, face to face, so we can actually engage the candidates, because our chiefs honestly don't even know who's running. I asked them and they asked me, and I said, I really don't know. It hasn't been on my radar until it's come up now. And I just want to say that we're in a real state of emergency in our part of the world, and this is inappropriate at this time. So Kukshan for listening to me.
Thank you, Cookie Christian. I do see that Cookie Wilson and Chief Marshall, or Proxy Marshall, go over to Cookie Wilson. Just give you, takes a moment to, there you go.
Hi, thank you for the resolution from Kasalem and also from Chief Tram and the words of Cookie Christian. And also Chief Christine Menaberia sent out an email. So by their record, the AFN would have been receiving a lot of correspondence, not just right now, since December, it sounds like. So those have been unheeded, and that's not acceptable for an organization that represents the chiefs And I'd like to say that on record because I think I'm not sure what the responses have been in regard to the record. And I also want to say that only 312 are totally registered for the meeting. And out of the 312, only 112 are currently online. You could correct me, Harold, if I'm wrong. And there are many out of the 204 chiefs here in BC. There's only just over 50 registered. So I think that's a real problematic, even if you do the math, the basics. And then you talk about as Chief Christine Miniberia talked, I hope she can be online. She might not be. She's one of the affected communities. But she said it was very insensitive and not acceptable for the AFN to continue the meeting this week in regards to all of the things that Salem said and Chief Christian said, but also the wildfires that, we're struggling with. There's 213 wildfires in BC. So much of the province is actually on fire. We have them, happen through the lightning, but also, a lot just extreme dry heat that we have here. It's like a heat wave. It has been labeled an emergency. So I don't know what the guidelines say about that when there's a declaration of emergency. Many of our communities have already declared that emergency. Mine in particular has. And we're not even in the ground zero of a lot of these fires, but we've been out supporting the best we could with the Lytton Nation and with the Kamloops and Skitchison. And we've gone through this in 2017, so this is more extreme than 2017. So I think that's, in the stat, Liam, as well. I heard Chief Edwards talk about that, Chief Michelle, sorry. So I think, I support this resolution, and I seen a lot of the people supporting it. So I think we got to do the right thing, as Chief Christian said. Our Grand Chief Stuart Phillip also supported supported the postponement of the elections this week because we're just plainly not ready. The numbers aren't there. There's a lot of correspondence that was sent in that wasn't heeded to, that might have prevented us from getting to this point, but we're here now, and if this is the Chiefs organization, then we make the decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Cookie. And just for the record, could you state your community?
Niskonith, Neskonlith, of the Squamish Nation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cookie. Now let us turn our attention to Marcel Head. Please identify yourself, sir. Take a moment to unmute your mic. There you go. You're good to go. Oh, you were there. You muted again. Now you're.
Okay. I'd like to thank the assembly.
Marcel, it sounds like you have another microphone or another computer open near you. So that
Yes, there is.
Yeah.
Sweet. All right. Can you hear me?
Better. There's still a. Go ahead.
Anyway, I was going to address the assembly in regards to the last year's postponement of the election.
And just introduce.
And here again, we have a resolution in front of us to postpone the, I guess, this summer's election. I would like to raise some points, the reason why I'm not in favor of the resolution. Like, I would like to get this thing over with. For one thing, the purpose of the election, I guess, is to elect a national chief. I'm being distracted by an echo here.
You sound good online, Marcel. And
anyway,
in your community.
I understand the challenges that the pandemic has raised over the course of the year, and I realize, today, that we have even more challenges that we're facing here in Saskatchewan alone with the findings of the children. And it's unfortunate. But I think, sometimes like times like these, we have to keep moving forward and to be able to utilize the process that's in front of us today. I came here, to travel to Saskatoon from my home community to participate in the electing of the national chief. And today, technology today that's in front of us. I think what this pandemic has done is taught us a real unique lesson how to utilize the technology that's in front of us today. We've had meetings with both our Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations and as well as within our tribal council called the Prince Albert Grand Council using Zoom and the other technology. We don't have to be face-to-face in meeting in meetings. We don't have to travel a lot, but we can utilize Zoom, to get our meetings done. So that's what technology has done. And I've received countless emails from the candidates that have worked so hard, to make sure that they follow the process, due process with this Assembly of First Nations election process. Now to turn it over again and postpone it, all that work that these candidates have done over the course of a few months, it'll be all for nothing. So I'm really feeling, sorry for the candidates if we do have to postpone the election again. And here, they're ready to go, and I think I know that here in Saskatchewan, I think we're ready, to vote on the position of the national chief of AFN. So I just like to make sure that somebody voices out something that's totally opposite, I guess, from what we're hearing so far. So I'm not in favor of the resolution. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chief Head. And I would note for the record that Chief Head is a chief of Shoal Lake Cree First Nation in Saskatchewan. Chief Christine Minabariette from Cooks Ferry. Welcome, Chief. We'll take a moment to unmute your mic. There you go.
Cooks Jam. I'm Chief Christine Minabariette from Cooks Ferry Indian Band, part of the Flecatin Nation here in the BC Interior. I'm in support of this resolution, not just for the fact of COVID and the complications that has implicated, but just as many have spoken about. We're in emergency mode here with wildfire mode. The heat wave that's passed through as well. We've lost entire town of Lytton. People lost their homes. They have nothing to go back to. The fires aren't over, and it's surrounding my community. On each side, I've got 4 major fires on each side. This impacts not just the Flecatin Nation, but the Statliam and the Shawetmik directly. I'd be curious to know how many people in the BC region are sitting at your table right now. And to my understanding, we're a heavy part of that chief number at this table. I'm very new to this process at AFN, so I haven't gone through the charter, and I quite frankly have not had time in this last week to determine the proper process to go about this on an emergency basis if this resolution hadn't already been on the floor. We need time to recover. I've had candidates, and I can appreciate the time and effort that you have put in to meet with me, to want to have my concerns voiced. I simply have not had time. And even trying to get on this call today to find my registration email, which is buried in all my emergency contacts that have been coming in for the last 6 days. There are many chiefs that are not on this call today, and it would be completely unfair to expect them to attend this meeting. At the end of the day, I respectfully appreciate all the work that's gone into this, but our chiefs are hurting for our people. We're doing the best that we can to make sure that they have a tomorrow to wake up to. So I'm in support of this and urge everybody to support this motion. Cook's Gem.
Thank you, Chief Minabariat. Let us turn our attention to Sagama Leroy Denny.
Yes.
Very good.
Just have to leave the room. Yeah, I'm not in favor of this motion. I really believe that we should have the election tomorrow. We're in the midst of crisis. We need a leader to continue the work. I have been listening to all the YouTube videos from all our candidates. We have amazing candidates. One of these leaders will become a great leader and a spokesperson for the chiefs here in the assembly. And as you know, there's crisis right across the nation. We're still in the midst of the pandemic. You know, we have wildfires, floods happening. We have people that are affecting we're having fishery crisis happen here in the east. Again, I'm going to introduce myself, Chief Leroy Denny, Escazoni, Nova Scotia. And I believe that we should have the election tomorrow. And I believe that we, you know, if we hold off till whenever winter, and we just have too many issues that we have to deal with, just too many. And a lot of work has been done to have this election. This past year, on President time, you know, we have adapted to meet on Zoom. Even our chief and council meetings, even all the meetings that are happening. So times has changed. I remember first starting off with Zoom and the other online meetings was very difficult, but we all adapted. We all made this work, and we came a long way. And I really believe that we can choose a national chief tomorrow. And the candidates are amazing. We have amazing candidates. I believe one of them will be a spokesperson that will address our issues here in the assembly. Many issues, there are just too many issues that we have to deal with. Again, we're in the midst of crisis. There's a mental health crisis happening. Many suicides are happening. We need a person that will advocate and speak for the assembly in the federal level to lobby for these issues. There's just too many things that are happening. We need a leader and to continue the work the national chief was doing. There's just too many things. Elections coming up. You know, there's more and more children are found in unmarked graves. And by time in a couple months, we will be looking at maybe 3,000 to 5,000 more unmarked graves will be found. And we won't have a leader to speak on that. We need a leader. Let's have election tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sagama. Let us turn our attention to Chief John Watatok from Wahpeton, Dakota. Chief Watataka, give you a minute, there you go. Yeah, I would note that your camera is not on, but that's okay if it's not possible. There you go.
Hi, good morning, Chair. This is Chief Watataka. I'll address you in language that was given to our people by the Creator. Abedakape chata was then a pictures of the door. Omnichie on Cheape, Rakape, Omakia. Hakata Sichape, or Chekia da Oshidapo. I'm going to say in a creator's name this morning, I greet you all. I'm currently on a walk with my people to St. Michael's Indian Residential School. And I was on my way to the Saskatchewan caucus yesterday when the asked me to participate, so I'm participating. We're in the last 15 miles or so. And I just want to say, in the past year during COVID, we had two of our biggest First Nations within Saskatchewan, 10,000 members strong, 3,400 voting delegates, membership voting delegates voted. In the midst of COVID, we ourselves had our election within COVID, in the midst of COVID. We do need a leader at the AFN, and I don't support the motion. My hearts and prayers go out to all the chiefs across Canada that are experiencing difficulties in emergency situations. We ourselves go through that from time to time, and as any other band. But at the same time, I believe that we need a leader sitting in that office to advocate on our behalf. With that, I say thank you, Chair. Good day.
Thank you very much, Chief. Let us turn to Chief Swiftwolf.
Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Brad Swiftwolf from Mooseman First Nation, Treaty 6 territory. I just want to speak in opposition of the resolution. I think we need to continue occupying that field. We have a great list of candidates. We continue to live in an oppressed society. I think we really need a leader to hit the ground running. It's really important to keep working on all our files and issues that we have. We continue to have be first and second, third place in suicides, incarceration rates, poor health, and we really need to not delay the work that needs to be done. Understand that we all have our own community issues and emergencies, and we really, while we're being occupied with these issues, we need a leader that's going to continue working for us, continue the lobbying efforts in Ottawa. Like I said, we have a great list of candidates. So while we deal with the issues at home, we need somebody to speak on our behalf and lobbying for the help that we need in our communities. So yeah, I just wanted to speak on the opposition of the resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I would note that on the speakers list there are 9, and so I'm going to pause the speakers list at these 9. I will check at the end for make sure we've got good coverage, so to speak. But I do want to encourage the chiefs coming forward to speak. If there are new arguments to be made, the arguments being made on both sides are well stated. I just would encourage you to add any additional arguments if you have them available. Please let us turn to Ogima Wally Burns. Please identify yourself, Chief.
First and foremost, I'd like to thank the creator and also the people, the elders that lift the pipe. I'm from James Smith Cree Nation in Saskatchewan, Treaty 6 territory. I'm against this resolution, and also I think a lot of chiefs I identified in regards to the whole thing, and I believe that we have to contain and push along in regards to this election. And moving along and forward, I think we need that direction as soon as possible from the AFN, the new AFN chief, and working diligently with the chiefs across Turtle Island. So I believe in moving forward, and that's the only thing that we got to maintain. And I know we're in a state of pandemic and also global warming in regards to the things that are happening in the world. And I think we should still go ahead and pursue with the election. And with that, thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you, Ogama. Chief Lee Spahan. Give Chief Spahan a moment. There you go, Chief.
Ansla, election 1-1 in Squash, Lee Spahan, Cook, Bevan, Select Cook, in the APTN Nation.
British Columbia. Hello and good morning, everyone. Lee Spahan, Chief of the Coldwater Indian Band here in British Columbia. I support this resolution due to the events that are occurring here in British Columbia right now, as well as the pandemic, the confirmation of the unmarked graves here in 2 locations in British Columbia, and now the wildfires. But I also want to state too, the communication, trying to register this morning to attend this Assembly of Chiefs. I registered and it took 37 minutes before anything was sent to me. I've contacted 2 fellow chiefs within my nation and they still can't get registered. Yesterday, when I tried to register, the numbers that were left at the Assembly of First Nations left a voicemail. And that voicemail was dated 2018. So does the AFN staff ever check those voicemails and change it to 2021? For the chiefs who are having problems trying to register or trying to even attend this assembly is very frustrating. And that's been stated over and over by fellow chiefs. And yet it has still gone unanswered. So the frustration from my fellow chiefs and myself trying to get registered and to join the assembly. I needed to comment on that because, you know, it's very hard when you're trying to join an assembly and then trying to make sure you get on to discuss this resolution, whether they're in support or not. But, you know, it's very frustrating. And how can the staff be accountable for voicemails that are left to chiefs that are dated from 2018? That is totally unacceptable. So I needed to state my frustrations on trying to get in and join in on this call, but also to state that I do support this resolution to postpone the election of the national chief. Thank you.
Let us turn to Chief Junior Gould.
Hello.
Welcome, Chief.
Just a point of discussion, I guess, is kind of what I'm looking at. If we've already accepted the agenda and everything, I'm wondering where this resolution fits into that. If we adapted the precedence for the charter, the way it sits now is a quorum constitutes a majority of chiefs present. Don't you think that we should have been a point of order to not adopt or accept the resolution, or accept the whole the meeting format? One of my concerns is where this resolution fits into with other resolutions. I'm from the Avalok First Nation in Prince Edward Island. We have a resolution put forward to be recognized as ourselves as being recognized on the executive for our territorial right that we feel has been outstanding for 20 plus years. So that's going to set precedence for that as well. I'd much rather be in a room and lobby on behalf of Prince Edward Island. But we've accepted that this is the format and this is where it's going to go. So you're going to set legal precedence for everything across the board if you accept this resolution. Should other resolutions be pulled because they don't have the lobbying format to present the idea that the resolution needs the merit? I agree with the presentation of who's at the table, but if we accept it, we've already allowed the charter to be a constitutional backing for what we're about to do. You'd almost have to stop everything if you were going to allow this resolution to come forward. It's going to set precedence across the board. I agree with the premise of it, but I'm just a little concerned about the due process and how the charter is being reflected. If we accept the way the charter is written and then we come back with this resolution and deny it, I think it would set a little bit of a legal precedence as well. Just a point of discussion. Thank you.
for that, Chief Gould. We do have legal counsel available. I do want to make sure we get through as many of these as we can in the time. I would note that the rules were adopted and the agenda was adopted. This resolution, as well as the resolutions you're referring to on the charter, are noted on the agenda. And so that's how we manage that procedurally and, fairly. With that, I just want to note that we have heard from BC, Yukon, Saskatchewan, Nova Scotia, Ontario, PEI, and I do want to get to as many. I don't know if we'll be able to get to everyone that I see in the hands up, and so I do apologize for that in advance. If we do move to closure, given the other things that we have on our agenda, I see remaining our Donald Miracle, Chief Miracle. Oh, sorry, my apologies, Chief Miracle. I was I had my screen in the wrong location. It is Grand Chief Vernon Watchmaker, whom I presume carries a proxy. So Grand Chief Watchmaker, let's clarify.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just want to take this time to acknowledge the chiefs that are currently present in the meeting today. I just wanted to make some clarity on the resolution that's being presented.
Chief,
I think
I do need to interrupt just briefly. I just want to make sure that often Grand Chiefs don't have a vote, and so I just want to make sure that the chief of a community are carrying a proxy.
Oh, so it'll be Kihu and Cree Nation. That's
okay.
Where
proxy for Kihu and Cree.
So that okay, I'll just go back. Chief Vernon Watchmaker, Grand Chief for the Treaty 6 territory, but also Chief of Kihu and Cree Nation.
Thank you very much.
I just wanted to make some I guess some points. Actually, even calling a point of order. I know the last chief, I'll be voting against not supporting the resolution, I'll say, for the reasons following. I believe that I know some chiefs cited connectivity as being one of the main issues, but on the AFN election procedures, telephone is just probably the most, I guess, easiest way to do voting as well. I think you have it on there. It's not just internet online voting. I think the telephone, you can vote by telephone as well. But I think this resolution should be either withdrawn or removed from debate, as it goes against the motions and resolutions regarding the election. I think the AFN charter and the process for holding elections, the AGA date was passed by the Chiefs and Assembly. Election rules require that the election be held on the second day of the AGA. It's not possible to postpone. Therefore, this resolution should be withdrawn and removed from consideration. As well as the electoral officer has already been hired. There has been significant costs to the candidates and the chiefs and proxies in attendance, as well as AFN. I think this resolution violates the election provisions of the AFN charter that outline the election procedures. There's no provision to extend the term of national chief. If other candidates wanted to run, then they should have. I think current candidates have taken unpaid leaves to run for the seat and have been campaigning across Turtle Island. This resolution is self-serving and needs to be thrown out. This resolution shows a lack of respect for the authority of chiefs and assembly who have already passed the election rules, who have already authorized the election, and who have already hired, the electoral officer. But also wanted to add to, back in May 7th, a letter from the AFN Legal Counsel advocating in a letter against the chiefs and assembly. Legal counsel should not be writing letters that are opposed to motions that have been passed at the AFN. This shows lack of respect for governance and the authority of chiefs and assembly. It needs to be dealt with immediately. So with that, I'm not in support of the resolution. I believe this election can take place, and that's out of respect of all the numerous elections that have taken place across this country, regardless of the pandemic. And I think with the easement of restrictions, I think we should go forward. So I do not support the resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. On the procedural issue of withdrawing the resolution, just to be clear, this resolution was brought forward through the resolutions process, reviewed by resolutions committee and by legal counsel, was found to be consistent with the charter and our election procedures, and a valid resolution for discussion. Let us then look to our Donald Miracle. Chief Miracle, thank you for your patience.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to express my condolences and empathy to the BC region who had wildfires, and to the Colossus First Nation and the Kamloops for the discovery of the graves and the other 184 graves that have been found. And we know that many more graves will be found throughout Canada as the investigations continue. I have to speak against the resolution for the reasons that have been articulated by many speakers previous to myself. I think we need a leader that has a current mandate. We know that it may cost about $1 billion to do the investigations that are required for the grave sites of the residential schools throughout Canada. And there's such an urgent need for safe drinking water and to address the homelessness of so many of our people and the poverty of our people. And we need a strong leader that has a current mandate to lobby for the resources that are going to be required to deal with the climate change impacts, with the forest fires and the floods and the national crisis affecting housing of Indigenous people, both on and off reserve. And we need a leader that is strong and that has a current mandate. So it's for those reasons I cannot support the resolution, and the election should proceed based on the arrangements that are already in place. I would be willing, though, to entertain some latitude, though, for the BC Chiefs to have maybe an extended voting period to accommodate, their busy schedules, or if they have to have last-minute proxies. I think we should have some flexibility to accommodate the voting of the Chiefs who are tied up with so many other issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Just on those procedural issues, you will note in your agenda the first ballot is a 6-hour long ballot, and the proxies, we are following that process where once registered, a chief is able to then change their proxy, but they have to be registered before the 2 o'clock Eastern time tomorrow for the election, or 11 o'clock Pacific time for the election tomorrow. Let us hear from Chief Zastroff from Manitoba. Again, apologies. I mistook that again. I had moved my screen. It is Ogama Pelche. Ogama Pelche, I'll ask you to unmute your mic.
Okay, there we go. Miigwech.
The camera is not on, but that's under there. You go.
Yeah. Oh, Miigwech, Kinawea. The Nick on them, Kinawea, Yamak. I Nakik. Nasagani, Denendum. We object Tamewa. And I guess in the where I'm from, Gemadu Pelchi, we come from and see the territory. And I've been in many discussions with the chiefs of Ontario and their assemblies and caucuses as late as this morning. And it's been our opinion and that this resolution should be defeated for, I'll say, a couple of reasons. One is that if we're going to be waiting for calmness to happen prior to an election, we may be waiting forever. As it has been stated, each of our communities does go through varying levels of crises. However, that's what we're tasked with, that responsibility to manage those to the best of our abilities. And I think that if we're
when we're talking fairness, there's a number of fine candidates that put their name forward. As we all know, that it is not an easy thing to step before our people and ask for their support in an election process. Many of these individuals have expended time, resources. They've left their employment or elected positions in order to put their names forward for this. And if this delay were to occur, then we would need to have a discussion and consider whether or not we're going to be reopening eligibility for additional candidates. So I don't believe that would be a fair process either. We would also need to do a reopening of an allotment for campaign expenses, because there are limitations that do exist for individuals that are campaigning for this position. We would also need amendments to the AFN charter to create authority for this process, to delay. And ultimately, I guess the other aspect is that there could be court challenges that could occur from candidates that are going to be without resolution by putting their name forward as a candidate. So we do have to bring that forward as a consideration. In saying all that, myself, I will be opposing this resolution, and I believe my colleagues from Ontario will also be doing the same. Miigwech.
Thank you, Ogama. I would just note, just given our agenda and the need at some point to move to our audit, that we have heard from BC, Yukon, Saskatchewan, Nova Scotia, Ontario, PEI. No amendments have been offered. We've heard both sides of the question, and there has been some diversity in the dialogue. I do want to take liberty and call on Chief Zastra from Manitoba, I believe, just to bring another region into this dialogue. But then we will look to call the question, as I have not heard new issues. Chief Zastra.
Good afternoon,
Welcome.
I'm Chief Sastry from Wisqueesy Peak First Nation, Grand Chief of Swampy Cree Tribal Council, and I would like to go with the postponed of the election on due to many issues like BC fires, all the grieving that the people are doing right now for the residential children that had been gone, the pandemic. Us from the northern Manitoba, our internet connection ain't good. We're cut off sometimes. Our phones, everything. We have no cell service some places, and it's not for a while for this election to happen. But also, we can't go forward with just jumping to something that we're not sure of. And all the people want to take part in it won't have the opportunity. And I think there's something in place to hold off for maybe, hopefully, another couple months, another till early fall or early winter, that we could have this election. I think it could hold off that much to support all our people from all over across Canada. Right now, I think there's only 204 chiefs on board here right now, and now there should be 634. So right there, you could see we need more. How would I say it? Support from all the chiefs, because this is a big decision we're going to make. I know these individuals that are candidates they're good candidates. I read about them, but we could hang on. But what I'd really like to know, why wasn't this brought forth before this was all happening? We should have knew about this. Now we're talking about it, but that's my opinion, and I am in agreement with postponing the election till further date. Miigwech.
Thank you, Chief Zastra. Can I just confirm Swampy Cree, that's Manitoba?
Yes, Swampy Cree Tribal Council is Manitoba.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. again, just looking at the list, I do see Chief Mitchell from Newfoundland. And so let's call on Chief Mitchell.
Thank you, Harold. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be involved today in this important conversation. For me, though, in terms of Newfoundland, I represent Hullabaloo First Nation. We're a very large band here. And I was really hoping to see a chief being appointed or elected at this time. I think is important in this country, as some chiefs have already stated, that we put somebody in place who can work on the important issues that our people face from coast to coast to coast in the next several months. And I heard from one chief earlier who wasn't in support of the resolution saying, well, when will we ever be at a point where we'll have COVID behind us or we'll have other critical issues behind us? I don't know if that will happen anytime soon. So I am concerned about delaying this election. I know today the numbers of people involved are low. Maybe tomorrow, though, because day 2 is an important day in the election, we may have a lot more chiefs involved tomorrow. And hopefully we'll see a bigger number. So I'd like to say this. I mean, I do appreciate the concerns expressed by the chiefs of British Columbia and Yukon and others. But I think we do have to move forward with this election. I think we have to get a leader in place. The candidates who I've had some time with now in video conferences to hear their platforms. I'm pleased with the people that have been putting their names forward. And to delay this, I think, would be detrimental to what we're trying to do in this country and detrimental to the Assembly First Nations. So I won't be supporting the resolution. And I suggest that we put it to a vote, very shortly today. And hopefully, we'll come to a place where we'll have a better sense for the chiefs that aren't aware who these people are by tomorrow. I think this evening there is a candidates forum and people should be taking part in listening to that and trying to get a sense of who these candidates are. But I think we need to move forward and have our election tomorrow. And a lot of effort has already been put into this. And I don't know where we'll be 5 months, 6 months, 7 months out. We'll be in any better shape in terms of the issues that are facing our communities. So I won't be supporting this resolution. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Harold, for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much. Just by way of time management, we're going to call the question shortly, just given we've heard a thorough review of the issue and great diversity in the conversation. But I did want to note that we have Chief Roberta Joseph on the list. And so I wanted to bring her additional female voice into this conversation. And I do see Chief Lance Heyman from Quebec, and so we'll take him as the last speaker. There have been a number of questions, procedural, which I think have all been responded to. I had noted the legal counsel was available, but it doesn't, I don't, at this point, I wasn't planning on turning to legal counsel. But let us look to Chief Joseph and then Chief Hammond, and then we will call the question. Roberta?
Good morning, everyone. Kamat Hozo. Hope everybody's doing fine. I'd just like to express I'm from Chundakuchin in the Yukon, and my condolences go out to the communities that are having grave difficulties, especially in BC and across Turtle Island. I'd like to just address the matter of the resolution. I'm not in support of the resolution at this time. I don't feel that the process is providing a fair opportunity for chiefs across this country to be able to vote, especially with technical difficulties that we're experiencing. I think that those technical difficulties will cause individuals not to be able to vote or register for voting. In addition, this is not the first time that this has happened. There's already been a precedent setting in 2014 when a former national chief, Sean Atleo, resigned, and the charter does allow for for an interim spokesperson, and business can be carried on as per the charter. Although I would like to offer a friendly amendment to the resolution stating that that should this resolution go forward and be approved, that there would be no further candidates to be allowed to enter into the candidacy. As mentioned, we have a lot of good candidates that are running. They've carried out their efforts and seeking the support of the First Nations communities across this country. And I think that it would only be fair to allow them to continue to be remaining as the candidates for the postponement of the election. Masicho.
Thank you, Chief Joseph. I just need to clarify one thing. So you are in favor of the delay, and so therefore you're speaking in support of the motion. Is that correct?
Yes, I am in favor of the resolution with an amendment. Thank you.
I thought I heard you say you were speaking against the resolution earlier, so I just wanted to be clear about that. I did want to draw in the voice from Quebec. So Chief, first of all, procedural issue. So I do look to the mover and seconder on the suggestion of amendment that no further candidates be allowed. Councilman? A moment to unmute your mic.
My apologies, Harold, it cut out there for a second. Could you repeat the question?
Yes, Chief Joseph from the Yukon has requested an amendment. If you're agreeable that no further candidates be allowed.
I'm not supportive of the amendment.
You and Chief Jesus Tram, I'll talk with you as a matter of record.
Yes, there should be no amendments at this time. Let's see.
Thank you very much. So again, the resolution there without amendment, fairly straightforward. We've heard significant arguments on both sides of the equation, so to speak. There's been good diversity, regional and gender in the dialogue. I have not been hearing any new arguments of late. And so I do want to call the question. However, we will look to Chief Lance Heyman from Quebec.
Good afternoon, everyone. First, I'd like to acknowledge the drum and the songs that were given this morning to open the meeting. The prayer by Elder Salt, again, start us off in a good way. Harold, I'm not going to be bringing forward any, new issues, new arguments. I think, the issue's been spoken to for and against. But my issue, quite frankly, it's the numbers. I will be speaking in support of the resolution for the very issues raised by chiefs across this country. It's a challenging time, absolutely. But here's my problem: when we only have 20% of the chiefs in this country on this call, voting on resolutions and ultimately choosing a national chief, I'm not very comfortable in feeling that national chief will have a very strong mandate and is representative, of First Nations across this country, because there are pockets of support. We can hear that, clearly in the people who speak. And there are most certainly, pockets of folks who are against the process moving forward for very, very, very good reasons. And so for me, simply, it's a numbers game. I'm not comfortable that 20% or 30% of chiefs in this country, will elect a national chief. And the floor for quorum right now is 57. This is my 7th election where I've had an opportunity to cast the ballot for national chief. And in every previous election, we've had upwards of 500, almost 600, chiefs coming forward to vote. And yes, I recognize that, this assembly, because of the global pandemic, has to be done virtually, but virtually is not improving, you know, the accessibility and the ability of chiefs to cast a ballot, where you think that, you know, with technological advances, that would be the case. What I'm hearing here is that, look, as important as the election for national chief is, there are issues that communities and nations are dealing with that are just as important, if not more so, because they're dealing with people's lives, people's, you know, futures, and priority is there. So I respect the diversity of opinion, but at the same time, I think, you know, we need to postpone this to ensure that the next national chief has the support, you know, of First Nations across this country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank all of you for speaking. As the co-chairs, we are given the heavy burden to carry of standing before our colleagues and respected colleagues and friends and managing the busy agenda that is given to us. And so I am going to move to call the question and extend my heartfelt apologies to those that we're not able to get to as a matter of time. In terms of the procedural issue noted by Chief Heyman, that is a separate process through which we will vote for national chief, and those numbers will be what those numbers will be tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern time. With that, then, let us call the question. The resolution is before you unamended as presented, read in full. You are voting either in favor to delay or opposed to delay.
Harold.
Leading. And with that, let us move to the question, please. I will call for the poll question to be called and placed on your screen for a vote. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're at 4 minutes, and so just another minute to go. Hasn't moved in a little bit, so I'll double check in 30 seconds to see if it's moved up. And again, looking for any other votes.
Just as a quick reminder to chiefs and proxies for voting, if ever you did close the window, you have the option to press on the polls button at the bottom of your Zoom window, which will allow you to then cast your vote.
All right, 30 more seconds, and then we will close this particular vote. Last call for votes. I'm delaying the election of the national chief. Thank you again, ladies and gentlemen, for your diplomacy. Let us close the vote and share the results. So you see the results there, 164 voting, 102 in favor. In our rules, even if we were using the vote and the percentages, it's 60%, not counting abstentions. So that is over 60%. Without two removed, it would go up a little higher. And so the resolution fails, and we will continue with the election for the national chief. Once again, thank you very much for your diplomacy, ladies and gentlemen. I do turn the microphone over to co-chair Cedric to carry us to the next item of business.
Thank you for that, Harold. And thank you to all the chiefs that participated. So the next point on our agenda is the audited financial statements. And again, this is found in your documents. And I would like for the first video to be set up of Anne-Marie Etier from Deloitte to be presented.
Elders, national chief, regional chiefs, and all, bonjour, good morning. My name is Anne-Marie Etier, audit partner at Deloitte and member of Kiligan-Zibi First Nation. Deloitte performed the audit of the financial statements of the AFN as of March 31st, 2021. In July 2021, we have met with the executive of the AFN to discuss the scope and results of our audit. In accordance with Canadian auditing standards, our audit is designed to enable us to express an opinion on the fairness of the presentation of AFN's annual financial statements prepared in accordance with Canadian accounting standards for not-for-profit organizations. No restrictions have been placed on the scope of our audit. In performing the audit, we were given full and complete access to the accounting records, supporting documentation, and other information requested. I also confirm that we are independent of the AFN. As the financial statements were approved by the executive, we have issued an unmodified auditor's report on the financial statements of the AFN for the year ended March 31st, 2021. In our opinion, the financial statements present fairly in all material respects the financial position of the AFN as of March 31st, 2021, and the results of its operation and its cash flows for the year that ended in accordance with Canadian accounting standards for not-for-profit organizations. Merci beaucoup. Thank you. Miigwech.
Thank you very much for that, Anne-Marie Etier. Next, we will be having Dan Richards, Assembly of First Nations Acting Chief Financial Officer. If I could have that video, please.
Good day, chiefs, delegates, guests, elders, and youth. I'm Naomi Reset, the Executive Director of the National Indian Brotherhood, and I'm coming to you today from my home on unceded Algonquin territory. Keith Martell and I are here today to present the annual update for this year's activities at the NIB Trust Fund. I would like to address the uncovering of the 215 children at the Indian Residential School in Kamloops. We all know that these children are the first to be uncovered of many, and it makes the mission of addressing the impacts of residential school and the healing needed more important than ever. Some of you will know who the NIB Trust Fund is and the programming and students we support in communities. For those of you that are new to this assembly, I'll provide you a very brief description of who the NIB Trust Fund is. The NIB Trust Fund is a registered charity and was established in 1975. In 2015, the courts approved the surplus of funds from the Indian Residential School settlement to be transferred and administered by the NIB Trust Fund under a set of terms and conditions and administration plan. The NIB continues to administer programs with these funds within the objects of the trust. The NIB provides resourcing and funding to First Nations, organizations, individuals, and those through 2 competitive application processes every year. The next group application opens in November 2021 and the individual call in 2022. In the 2021 fiscal year, the NIB Trust Fund awarded $9.8 million to qualified donees, charitable organizations, and First Nations communities. 54% of our groups applied were awarded funding, and the total ask from applicant groups was over $30 million, making our process very competitive and the need so great. When looking at the graph, we see the balance of funds awarded to groups for language, healing, culture, family connection programs, youth, and education and employment, all important objectives of the trust. We funded 40 First Nations this year, and I encourage you all to apply in next November so we can fund more First Nations in the coming year. As I mentioned before, our second stream of funding is the individual call. This call opens in April of every year. This past year, we awarded $4.4 million to individuals across Turtle Island. 71% of the individual applicants were awarded funding. 92% of all our recipients were directly affected by the Indian Residential School system. We also see the types of education support the NIB Trust Fund offers. We supported post-secondary certificates, diplomas, traditional cultural learning, on the land activities. This bar chart details the dollar amounts allocated to each region across Turtle Island. The regional division of the annual allocation, or split as we call it, uses a formula that considers 4 factors to determine the monies in each region: the number of survivors, the number of residential schools, the number of First Nation communities, and the population. You'll also see that there is a percentage set aside for national coast-to-coast-to-coast programming. This is our small but mighty team here at the NIB Trust, and I would like to thank them for this year for keeping programs running and getting funds into beneficiaries who are doing all the programming needed in our communities. Now, I would like to introduce the Chair of the Board of Trustees, Mr. Keith Martell, to provide you an overview of board financials and the investments of the NIB Trust Fund.
Thank you, Naomi. As Naomi mentioned, my name is Keith Martell, and I'm the chair of the Board of Trustees of the National Indian Brotherhood Trust Fund. My father and all of my relatives on my father's side went to residential school, so I would consider myself a second-generation survivor, and I would also consider myself a thriver from a strong Indigenous background and a First Nation that is very supportive of our community. I'm coming to you today from my office on the Yellow Quill First Nation, the head office of First Nations Bank of Canada on the Yellow Quill First Nation land. I want to talk to you briefly about the NIB Trust Fund. So starting on slide number 7, the Trust Fund has full responsibility for the oversight of the administration and management of the trust, supervision and selection of key staff members to perform the functions as designated by all laws, trust agreements, and court orders. The fund has 10 regional trustees, each allocated from one of the regions to not only oversee as a whole the NIB Trust Fund, but also to bring regional perspective and to approve regional allocations within each of the regions that funds are allocated from the NIB Trust. The board has 4 committees, including a finance and audit and investment committee, a programs committee, a governance committee, and appeals committee to look at appeals to our decisions around the allocation of funding. Our 11 trustees are committed to carrying out the oversight, as I mentioned, and the responsibility for ensuring that the fund is being used as intended and that the assets are being managed in accordance with best practices for investments, and to ensure that we maximize the distribution to beneficiaries over the term of the funds. If you look at the results of the fiscal year, the financial year ended March 31st, 2021, the fund had total assets of $237.3 million. This was distributed into 3 funds and a general fund that's got the residual amounts in it and is the operating fund of the NIB Trust. We had an education legacy fund, which had $129.6 million. An education fund had $103.8 million. These 2 funds are specifically for First Nations beneficiaries and their survivors. We also managed the Métis Fund, which had approximately $3.7 million at the end of March. The Métis Fund were as a result of the Indian residential school settlement process, and the NIB board was allocated responsibility for overseeing these Métis funds until those funds are fully expended on Métis beneficiaries. The investment income for the fiscal year ended March 31, 2021 was $42.32 million. That's the income earned on the investments that we have in the funds. And those monies are used to operate and for beneficiary disbursements. And I'm going to talk a bit more about the investment income later in the presentation. The distribution to the beneficiaries is the primary reason NIB exists. It supports all of the group and individual programs and allocations that Naomi talked about. And the Board of Trustees takes this responsibility absolutely important. It is the primary reason we exist, and it is where all the positive benefits of NIB result from. And it is very important, and we ensure that we not only ensure that we maximize the benefits to beneficiaries today, but have the sustainable investment policies that are going to ensure our capacity to continue to support those benefits to beneficiaries going forward. The administration expenses are the cost of operating the National Indian Brotherhood Trust. That includes staff, management, the oversight and responsibility for reporting on these funds. The total administration expenses in the last fiscal year were $1.13 million, which is the total expenses are limited to 15% of the distributions to beneficiaries. And this year, as our processes were limited as to how much we could travel, get to see beneficiaries and assess, the costs were a little bit less than the limit, but the objective is always to minimize the cost from administration, while, as Naomi mentioned, ensuring that the staff make sure that those benefits are going to the right people and that the processes are being followed so that everybody has a fair shot at getting the funds. And then we ensure accountability back to the survivors as to where those monies are spent. Slide number 9 shows a reconciliation of the fund balances from last year to this year. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but I'm going to highlight 2 things. First of all, we did receive a new distribution of $12.3 million from the Government of Canada. This is an ongoing process whereby as the Government of Canada settles claims that were put against the original amount set aside for the Indian residential school survivor settlement, that as those funds become available for general use and those individual claims are settled, The residual of those funds goes to the NIB Trust for management going forward. So we had an additional contribution of $12.3 million. While we don't know how much of the residual funds are still to come to the NIB Trust, we expect that this 12.3 was one of the last distributions of actual capital to the trust fund. And from now on, the trust fund is going to be dependent on investment income to continue to sustain the fund. As I mentioned, the other one I want to highlight is that the 9.53 million distributions to beneficiaries. This money this year is coming for First Nations beneficiaries out of the education fund. $8.92 million of our distributions of 9.53 came from the education fund. Today, all of the benefits paid to beneficiaries for First Nations beneficiaries is coming out of the education fund alone. The Education Legacy Fund is meant to resume responsibility for those distributions after the original amount of the education fund is expended. And I'll talk about that in a minute. We also spent $610,000 on distributions to Métis beneficiaries. If you look at slide 10, this is a summary of the investment returns performance from the monies we have invested. With over $200 million of invested funds, it's extremely important that the NIB Trust Fund beneficiaries pay specific attention to the wise management and control of those funds. We went through an extensive process in July of 2018 in selecting new investment managers and ensuring that we had a policy that was going to support the sustainable future of the NIB fund distributions. I think the last couple of years we've experienced that the decision to go to a new investment policy and to select best-in-class asset managers is truly paying off for the NIB Trust Fund. In last fiscal year, so the year ended March 31, 2020, as you all remember, was the year we were just going into the COVID crisis. Stock markets all around the world were experiencing significant declines. And if you look at this chart, the second last set of bars show that in the fiscal 1920s, that's the year ended March 31, 2020, the NIB Trust Fund, even in a world where there was significant downturn from COVID, we still earned a positive return of 1.5%. And that beat our benchmark. So the benchmark is what we assess ourselves against. We assess our performance in real terms, but we also look at similar funds with similar assets, and we compare our returns against those funds. In fiscal 1920, we outperformed the benchmark, which had an average return of minus 2.1%. We had a 1.5%. So that in that year, even though the returns were small, we outbeat competitive trust funds. So competitive investments in similar funds, NIB Trust Fund performed very much better. In fiscal 2021, so the year ended March 31st, 2021, there were significant returns. The markets rebounded from the COVID downturn, and NIB participated significantly in these returns. The total investment performance for the NIB Trust Fund for the year ended March 31, 2021 was a positive investment income of $42 million, which is an annual return of 21.9% return on the invested capital. Even though this was below the benchmark, we participated in virtually all of the upside of the rebound in the markets post-COVID. And it builds on the fact that we outperformed the markets in the prior year, which was negatively affected by COVID. So overall, the investment returns of $42 million are very much consistent with the expectations of the trustees for the sustainable performance and the continued availability of the trust fund to deliver approximately today $10 million of funds to beneficiaries. If you look at slide number 11, out of the $42 million of realized investment return, the fund had about a $9.4 million of realized net investment income and about $32 million in unrealized. These are the capital gains on stocks and bonds that were invested in the market. We really consider the whole amount of $42 million as capital of the fund, because even though those investment returns are unrealized, these returns are all in marketable securities and investments that could be sold at the current rate. So we consider the whole $42 million as income of the fund. And we look over the long term that creates a sustainable ability for us to distribute to beneficiaries approximately $10 million and support the ongoing operations of the entity. If you look at slide number 12, this is the allocation where I want to point out where the legacy fund and the education fund is going to be going in the long term. The requirement under the residential school settlement was that the education fund be spent over the first 20 years of operation of NIB Trust Fund. So by 2035, the education fund part of this bar chart has to be completely expended. How we do that is we look at the income from all of our investments. We allocate 60% of those income from the investments to the legacy fund, and we allocate 40% of those investments to the education fund. So when we spend money on beneficiaries today, it all comes out of the education fund. It's partly the capital of that fund and the income. And over time, our expectation and our plan is that that education fund will be fully expended by 2035. And if you look at this bar chart in 2035, the education fund should be virtually gone, and the legacy fund should be as big as those two pieces combined, so that in the long run, we have the same amount of capital, which has the capacity to support the same amount of distributions in the long term, even though the education fund is fully expended. The legacy fund is meant to survive in perpetuity, which means that we will continue to support residential school survivors and their descendants going long into the future. In closing, just as Naomi mentioned at the beginning, I want to mention that I think, as Naomi does, that our purpose and intent of the NIB Trust Fund is as important as ever. We continue to see the effects of residential schools, but more the negative effects of residential schools. And I think more and more Canadians are starting to realize that that was a negative experience as well. We are, however, fortunately, continuing to see the positive outcomes of changing that reality and supporting beneficiaries and communities to perform healing, reinvigorate languages and culture, and support the education of their members is a very positive contribution, which I am very pleased to be a part of. As Naomi mentioned, we really do value the input, and I hope that next year we'll be in person to talk with you and hear your input directly. But I do encourage you to connect with NIB. Understand how more of your initiatives in your community and your region can be supported by the NIB, and how more of the individuals in your communities can qualify for support from the NIB Trust Fund. We continue to support community's ability to interact with us. Specifically, we've got things like qualified donee workshops. So this is the ability to help individual First Nations qualify as a registered charity so that we can get those funds to your community directly and not have to go through intermediaries. So through benefits like that, through ongoing discussions with Naomi and her staff, we encourage you to help us do the best and get the most benefit out of the amounts we send out to beneficiaries of the NIB Trust Fund. I thank you for your time and attention, and I look forward to any opportunity to answer any questions you might have, and I encourage you to connect with Naomi and her staff. Thank you.
Lalia to Naomi Resset, Executive Director, and Keith Martel, the Chair of the NIB Trust. We have one final presentation for your information by Dan Richard, Assembly of First Nations Acting Chief Financial Officer. And then after that, we will have a question and answers period with the people you saw in the videos. So anyone who has questions on the audited financial results will be able, or audited financial statements, will be able to ask them. And also, as a point of information, we will be announcing the official results of the vote that just took place right after the Q&A. So if I could have Dan Richard's video presented. So our technical staff needs a few moments. So in that case, I think we will go straight to announcing the results from the earlier vote. I know it's something that people are very interested in. So with the phone votes being added to the final results that were from the chiefs and proxies in this room, we had a total of 60 votes for, 103 votes against, and 3 abstentions, which means that we did pass with 62%, or was defeated, with 62%. So in that sense, as was asked in the chat earlier by one of our chiefs and proxies, this means that we will continue with the agenda as was adopted earlier this morning. We will proceed through the different items that we had scheduled for today, go towards the all candidates forum in the afternoon at the end of the evening. And then finally, tomorrow will be election during the whole day. The Chief Electoral Officer will be there to explain that process in full, since that is really separated from our role as co-chairs. I will give just a few more moments for our technical team and now ask for Dan Richards' video to be played.
Hello, thank you for inviting me to present the financial statements of the National Indian Brotherhood for March 31st, 2021. As previously discussed by Deloitte and Touche, they reviewed the audited statement of the independent auditor's report and provided you the report that was approved by the executive committee, where they have their basis for opinion has been a clean audit opinion. I will start off by looking at the statement of operations for the year ended March 31st, 2021, where you will see total revenue for the year of $34,264,301 compared to $46,179,000 the year before, where the largest difference, including Indigenous Services Canada, which you will see when we move on to the next page, and in a few of the notes that summarize it, is that revenue for the year, for the most part, had deferred contributions that represented a large portion this past year due to COVID that ended up having a lot of organizations, including NIB, RFN, having a lot of expenses not incurring by March 31st, 2021. So they had a large portion of their revenue deferred until the next fiscal period to match those expenses, which you will see when we move to the statement of financial position to really highlight that. Our expenses for the year, as a comparison, landed up having $31 million and left us in a surplus of $2,726,217 at the end of the fiscal year 2021. Now, the next page, the statement of financial position, you'll see the current assets, the $28,994,000 in cash. And that again really relates to the deferred contributions that were received, with money received to March 31st, but that had approval to be deferred into the next fiscal period, 2021, 2022, to complete those programs and funding that was received during the year. So had current assets of $32 million at the end of the year compared to $18.6 million the year before, leaving total assets of $32.8 million compared to the $19.3 million, which aligns with the liabilities, which show a slight accounts payable reduction of $4.5 million compared to $7.9 the year before. But really the largest increase sitting in those deferred contributions is mentioned at $22.8 million at March 31st, 2021, compared to the $8.5 million at March 31st, 2020. And leaving total current liabilities of $28.39 million for this past fiscal year. And comparing the 2020 to the 2021 had very comparable current assets over current liabilities, actually in a slightly better position for the March 31st, 2021 year end. So had net assets invested in capital assets of $370,000 and did an additional internally restricted amount of $2.8 million during this fiscal year to bring that up to $4 million, leaving unrestricted net assets at the end of the fiscal year of $87,487. Now our invested, you will see our statement of changes in net assets. That's where you will see the invested in capital assets changed to $370,000, or internally restricted assets 1.2 with 2.8 restricted this year, bringing that amount up to the 4 million. In our unrestricted deficiency general operations, ending the year at 87,487 for a total net assets of $4,458,400. Our statement of cash flows, you will see our excess of revenue over expenses of 2.7, amortization, and then our changes in non-cash operating working capital items, which again really relate a lot to those deferred contributions, which caused a net increase in cash for the fiscal year 15,944, along cash beginning of year 13 million, leaving that cash end of year 28,994,000. Our notes to the financial statements remain fairly unchanged for the last over the last few fiscal years. I will highlight a few of those larger changes, or a few items worth mentioning, of course, where reference back to the statement of financial position or the grants and contributions receivable. You will see them by funding type, leaving the balance of the 2,041,931 that was receivable at the end of the fiscal year. Our capital assets, net book value, you will see slightly decreased to $370,000 compared to the previous fiscal year. Deferred contributions, again, that was the major one with the balance at the beginning of the year of $8,560,000, with revenue received during the year of $48.5 million compared to 2020 of $46.8 million. So you will actually see there was almost $2 million more still received in fiscal year 2021, but yet on our statement showed that we had a less revenue recognized because we had a large portion that was deferred at the end of the fiscal year, being the difference between the 8.5 compared to the $22.8 million. So again, a lot that was deferred that's sitting in cash balance that's readily available for this fiscal year. Our deferred contributions, which shows it by funder, with the majority of that 22.8 coming from Indigenous Services Canada, 17.1 million. And then you will see the rest of the, that will made up of that total 22.8, where this total amount was part of those that were approved and requested to defer those contributions to the next fiscal year. Contingencies, note mentioned previously by Deloitte, there has been nothing that came to the attention since the March 31st date up until the audit report date of July 5th that required an additional notation or any adjustment to the financial statements. Our commitments for the fiscal year ending 2025, you can see it has reduced down, and that's just because there's some lease payments under operating lease and office space and equipment that mature in 2025. So the office space renewal will be happening. In that case, we will see once that's required after the 2023 year that will increase back to where closer to where that currently is. Here's a summary of the changes in non-cash working capital items. Again, as mentioned, the majority of that change was from the deferred contributions. This controlled entity, you will hear from the National Indian Brotherhood Trust Fund. A summary of their audit as well will be presented, and this is just a snapshot from those statements for in note 11. Note 12 and 13 are just standard notes with regards to the executive salary and the pension plan. And then the credit facility notes that there is nothing outstanding at the end of the fiscal year. Note 17 on page 13 of the statements is just highlighting again the impact that has happened since COVID, since the beginning of 2020, and that at this point it's hard to predict if it will have any lasting impact financially or any other impact. So at this point, it's just a notation that's standard in every audit that's going on for across Canada. The next few schedules will just be more of detailed for each funding line item that lists the revenue and corresponding expenses. Specific, other than you will see that the total at the very last page, page 20, will then agree back to the first statement of operations that was presented. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to present the audit, and I will send it back to the chair to continue.
Thank you very much, Dan. So again, that was Dan Richard, Assembly of First Nations Acting Chief Financial Officer. And as I mentioned earlier, we're going to have a period where you can address the audited financial statements. We have Anne-Marie Etier from Deloitte, Dan Richards, who we heard from, Keith Martel, and Naomi Resett from the NIB Trust Fund, who are here to answer any questions you have on the audited financial statements. We'll be taking a few minutes to go through these questions. Once again, raise your hand using the raise hand function, either in your reaction tab or on your participants list at the bottom. And once we go through that, we will then move on to a wellness break, look away from our screens a little bit. And we're going into a pretty difficult subject after this one, in a moment of silence to honor the missing and deceased children who went to Indian residential schools. So just as a heads up, we are going through difficult subjects. And if you wish during the wellness break to prepare a smudge, to have something with you to assist you through those processes, we just want to let you know ahead of time. So like I said, we have our four fiscal experts here. Second call to see if we have any questions, any comments on the subject. I see most of you are ready to go on break, is what I imagine. I'll give one final call, a few moments to see if anyone wants to use the raise hand function to speak on the fiscal reports. And if not, then we'll move towards our wellness break. Take the time to look away from your screens, take the time to get a little something to drink, a little something to eat. And again, if you need to prepare a smudge to help us through the next section. Seeing no hands, I will then call for a wellness break. We will take 10 minutes, so come back at 45, in whatever hour that is your local time. So we'll be back in 10 minutes. Thank you.